Especially to everyone in the live stream. Welcome. It's so good to be with you all today in this session called Ensuring Full Engagement of Women and Girls in Religion and Society. I like the title of this because it is ensuring and not just encouraging or inviting or something more subtle, because you would hope that in the 21st century, we're at a place where we can ensure women participation and girls participation. So I have some really amazing, esteemed speakers with us today from different walks of life that I'll be introducing in just a moment. Each speaker will have about 10 minutes to share their remarks, and then we'll have some open discussion and some Q&A from the audience as well. And just one thing that I would like to say before I turn it over to our first speaker is that when we're talking about ensuring full engagement of women and girls, it can be at many different levels. It can be at a structural level, where there are organizational barriers. It can be at an interpersonal level where you have to work through expectations that women have of themselves, our families have of us, society has of us, and how we work through those expectations. And then, of course, there are all those other things we have to work through, like the mental and emotional needs. And then there are the stereotypes and the discriminations and things like that as well. So I hope that our speakers today will shed light on some of those many different dynamics, and then we can have a fuller discussion afterwards. So with that, I would like to introduce our first speaker. And she is visiting us from Colombia. Welcome. Her name, yes, her name is Liliana Franco, President of Latin America and Caribbean Confederation of Religious Women and Men, CLAR, right, is a short form for it. So thank you and welcome.
Thank you. Buenas tardes. Me dirigiré a ustedes en español.
In Spanish. The best way that I have to come close to reality is contemplating things. For this reason, I'd like to invite you, friends, both men and women, to contemplate the reality of women in the continent. I'd like you to see this presentation. I'd like you to approach the feet of women in the continent. In the screen, we can see the feet of Marisol. She's 6 years old. She's one among so many peasant girls in the continent. She has to walk long distances to be able to reach her school. The education she receives does not recognize her identity or culture. It is the same that is given in the cities, and the standards used to measure her learning process do not consider factors such as culture, nutrition, housing, public utilities, family environment. The pandemic has shown us the social, economic, and technological gaps to which she is subjected. I'd like to look at the tired feet of Juanita, Estefania, and Adelaida. They have walked long distances looking for the station known as American Dream. They walk quickly and being afraid, hungry, without knowing that they are being expected at a cage known as protection station, where they will be taken away from their parents, language, rights, and culture. Forced migrations are a characteristic of recent years in Latin America. Large numbers of people have left El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, to move towards the US through Mexico. Millions of Venezuelans flee their country basically through Colombia or Brazil to settle in these countries or move further south in the continent. In Venezuela, the population, many women flee from the political regime. With Teresa and with Lucia, I invite you to step down from the beast, to hurry to build a cambuche, a shelter to protect the children and the virginity and the assets that are kept in the backpack and in the soul. Let's stay with them to flavor the hunger, the impotence, the helplessness. They see in the news how the GDP increases and the production diversifies, while in their case, their income is so low that they cannot make ends meet. With them, we see that with a social crash in the recent times, we see that this contradicts that our countries live in democracy. The gaps grow, faced with the indifference of many of our rulers. And let's stop along the road to stay there at the corner of the hood with Mariana, where opportunities go by without making any kind of sign to the youth. In this same place where the protagonists of the micro-traffic works, and that corner that witnesses clashes between gangs and where the ruling forces recruit people. Let's stay with Elena and Milagros in the town where the politicians promised to build a road or a causeway. Let's become angry with them when faced with the corruption which reduces the opportunities of the poorest. Let's see how our people fight each other with regard to narcissistic campaigns and different ideologies. Let's resist development plans of governments where the only interest is the private well-being. Let's look at the rallies. Let's see that the immediate motives are not the same in all countries, and all characteristics have changed, but the social indignation is common to all. With Elena and Milagros, we cannot doubt that this continent has moved, expressing the inequalities and the shameful conditions of social injustice. And with Joanna, let's listen the cry of all those women who are driven to places that they don't want to, the victims of human trafficking that are taken from one place to another to be exploited, sexual exploitation, labor exploitation, or as beggars. Let's recognize in their company that for each victim of human trafficking that has been identified, there are more than 20 that have not been identified. And let's look at the victims of sexual abuse, those that claim new ways of relating. With Susana, let's try and reach for the impossible, the roads of labor equality, fair labor, and well compensated. At the pace of her steps, let's feel how the middle class decreases while poverty for women grows. Let's move with her. Let's approach that tiny space where she works, where she does her maquila, and let's look at the factory where many rights are frozen for women behind the freezers or in ovens where they cook panela and sugarcane and health. Aricete, she belongs to one of the many indigenous peoples in Brazil. She sees her land being destroyed by mining activities, mega projects that do not recognize the right to the land or the right of people. She dreams about the possibility that the ecological movement is able to make any progress. We could stop in this contemplative exercise and provide a handkerchief to Monica. She is at the side of the road, tired, as a result of the system that has turned her into a sexual object due to the consumption that reduces any possibility for her. In the case of the beauty stereotypes that place her in an equal situation, she cries in a market where they expose and consume identities. Consumption bleeds her out. This person is an unknown person, a Jane Doe, but it could be Maria, Teresita, Ofelia, Yolanda, Julia, one of so many social leaders of our peoples that have been murdered for defending human rights, the construction of peace, for working for an ethical, civil ethical, for helping their communities to diversify their crops, or to march in favor of rights. Daniela and Narta, they learned how to make their way 2 by 2 with difficulties, overcoming many obstacles, even congressional ones. They studied theology when the universities in countries offered limited possibilities of learning that. They applied for their PhDs in dogmatics and pastoral education. They went back to their country to teach what they had learned, but they found the doors of the university closed. One of the universities offered them limited hours, and in another university, they were told that the vacancies were, or the job vacancies were only for male priests. Beatriz has just turned 72. She teaches religion since she was 15. Everybody can see in her eyes the love she always offered to other people. Today she felt sad, crossed her legs, because the new priest imagined that a person or a woman with no education could spread the gospel. On a daily basis, I see the walk of life, how these women walk through life. Sometimes I follow them, sometimes I walk with them, and with them I believe in the possibility of a clear outlook, especially with that view that can give them hope to all from the different faiths. We should all continue working for a big and oval table where we feel as brothers and sisters, given the reality of women that do not have possibilities to access a good education, and having learned that educational systems are not inclusive, we have the challenge to favor from the different faiths the training for women, or the education of women on a qualified basis, and ensure that they have access to specialized training in theology. The sensitivities, female sensitivities, give different nuances to the interpretation of reality. The presence of women in religion and churches based on critical training help not to make the same mistakes in terms of schemes. We need to exercise a new practice with an education that allows us to move as responsible leaders towards an exercise of communion and engagement based on the recognition of the common dignity of women and men. We need to include the presence and contribution of women in the education of men. We can also see or look at the challenge of looking at the structures so that women can be part of the decision-making process. It will be necessary and it is urgent to generate reciprocal or mutual relationships, encourage equality and justice in the participation processes. It is also necessary to include in the reflections the corporality, the bio and social development, the recognition of the woman's body to favor ethical discussion and interrelations. It is necessary to review the scriptures in terms of inclusion, in terms of the awareness of mother and father and the different categories, and given the clear idea that women are affected in the case of violence and human trafficking, we feel the challenge of designing projects to prevent this scourge, accompanying the victims and being present in at public levels where we can develop common projects that contribute to the life and the dignity of women. We should continue together to generate prevention dynamics for the victims, create networks and synergies for the accomplishment of common goals, continue to incorporate the reconciling view and a reciprocal dialogue in all interreligious spaces. This is without doubt the hour of women, and we're all responsible for working towards this. Thank you.
Thank you, Liliana, for those points and for making the lives of so many of these women more real and girls so real for us. And the next time you walk in with them or you see them, please give them our warmest regards. And I hope we can do more to make life better. Next up, we have Christina Tobias-Nahi. She is the Director of Communications and Public Affairs with the Islamic Relief USA and serves as Advisory Council Liaison for the Refugees, Displacement and Migration Working Group for the G20 Interfaith Forum. Christina.
Thank you. A great honor to be here. Generally, I'm here speaking on refugee panels, and I know we've heard a lot today about some of our thematic areas, whether it's refugees and forced migration, whether it's climate change, whether it's the pandemic and public health. And in all of these, we know that women and girls are more vulnerable. But today I'm not actually here to speak about that work, but to present a campaign that Islamic Relief Worldwide, our federation, our family of offices across more than 40 countries has come together to launch later this year. So I'm going to give you a bit of a teaser. We actually have a wonderful video and collateral materials, but they're still embargoed, so I'm not able to share them with you on the live stream, but I'm happy to share them in more private audiences. And I want to, also appreciate Liliana bringing the case studies and, as was just said, those stories and making it, touch our hearts in that way. And one of the reasons also that we have not yet launched is, and I'll go into some of this historical, we are out in the field collecting these stories, and we had many delays because of COVID that, we are now just getting back out there to do that. We want to do justice to these women, and we want to give them their voices. We don't want to speak on behalf of them. But I do want to just step back a moment before I come to our actual campaign. So just this week, there was an essay in the Washington Post talking about Sheryl Sandberg that many of us know from Facebook and now Meta, I believe it's called, and how she's stepping down and what that means or doesn't mean the end of the lean in era. So many of you know she's written books, she's been a motivational speaker, giving tips to women about how to ascend to leadership and how to claim their space. And this essay had an assumption, a question, and an observation. And the assumption that she had, made in a lot of this, or that those of us who kind of jumped on this bandwagon, is that the ascendancy of women into leadership would continue to be linear as we gained academic credentials and skills and had mentorship and these pathways. And we've really seen with the pandemic how that is not the case, right? So many women had to step back and leave these career trajectories because they had family responsibilities that took center stage. So that was an assumption that was wrong. The question that this essay asked was, is that actually what women aspire to, just to hold these leadership positions in these capitalists and corporate entities? Or are they really looking for something more transformative? And I'm going to come back to that. And the observation, and now I've somewhat forgotten and the observation that this author made was, this simple act of seeking equality is actually transformative. And people, whether male or female, rarely surrender that power without a fight. So in keeping with this topic of what is transformative, Islamic Relief, again, as a family, came together and decided, because we have that responsibility of being a well-known entity and having that visibility and having that access in so many countries where we work, whether it's access to the local communities and that trust, whether it's access to government and people in power, as part of that responsibility, we needed to be part of calling out where there's, where we could be improve as a community and as a faith tradition, and make recommendations in that regard. And because the Muslim faith tradition is not hierarchical in the sense like Catholicism, where you could make an edict, whether it was on climate change, around the encyclical, and then it could filter down. We couldn't speak on behalf of the Muslim tradition, but we could give guidance and counsel and take that out into the communities and geographies in a consultative process and say, this is what we think our texts say, this is how we interpret them, and get that buy-in. And so that was a process that actually began before COVID. So we started that. We created a document, which was called the Islamic Declaration of Gender Justice and Women's Empowerment. And we took scripts and we worked with faith leaders and imams and scholars, male and female, on interpretation of our holy scriptures and texts. And we took that across geographies around the world and into local communities. Now, I want to talk about why we did this. What was the process? What are the challenges that we have encountered? And I loved what someone said on one of the panels today, and I can't remember where, but where there are challenges, there are also opportunities. So, historically, we were looking at where we're seeing some regression in communities. I mean, I will call out, for example, we work in Afghanistan as one of many places, and we all know what we're seeing there. when we come from this very strong tradition of Muslim women who have been queens, who have been prime ministers, we have 2 members of Congress currently here in the United States. So we have this very strong tradition, and yet we don't see that everywhere. So the objective of our declaration, and I'll just read this, was to be a landmark initiative that would present key faith principles of justice and balance to challenge harmful cultural practices and ingrained social traditions that leave women disadvantaged and vulnerable. It affirms the God-given rights of all human beings and our duty to stand up firmly to uphold justice. This proposed declaration will mobilize global and regional action and advocacy and call for partners and signatories, both within the Muslim faith communities in which we work and our allies, faith and secular, and multilaterals as well, to pledge their commitment to ending gender injustices. So that has been the objective with which we've spent a number of years now working on this particular initiative. So what we did, as I mentioned, is pull out textual scripture on affirming the rights of women, whether it was rights to education, rights to marriage, rights to divorce, what is an appropriate marriageable age, rights to participate in the workforce, ascend to leadership, and even in the political spheres as well. So kind of all of these spaces, as well as just protection, right? Because we need to start out with protection in order to be able to move into some of these other spaces. So as we've kind of gone out there into the communities and gotten endorsements, this is where we've actually found some of our challenges. Now, first, this initiative is twofold. It's both and originally it was actually more of an external facing campaign where we wanted to educate other communities and other faith traditions about what they might be seeing in the media is not the correct interpretations, and it's not Islam. It is not religious, it is cultural, some of these harmful practices. Yet as we were venturing out and doing this externally, we were finding also some resistance and realizing we needed to do education within our own community as well. Because one of the barriers, and I think a question later about barriers, is religious literacy, even within our own communities. And so how do we transcend that barrier through education? And another, challenge we had as we've gone about doing this is a lot of faith leaders and imams and scholars, while very privately endorsing everything that we're saying, may not want to put themselves on the line to publicly endorse us and our campaign. And so, we're learning, how to work through some of that, and that is an ongoing process that we are doing. But that also presents opportunities as well, as I mentioned. So the actual campaign will launch this fall. As I mentioned, it's going to happen on the same day and the same week across about 40 countries to make it very impactful, to get a lot of media attention. We're going to have a lot of social media, a lot of scholars, a lot of panels. We're going to do advocacy to different governments. We're working with different bodies of the UN. We're also going to do some stunts that get attention. We're still working out what some of those are, and if anyone has good ideas, we're open to hearing about them. But yeah, so we are, as an organization, this is a large advocacy piece, but I'll just kind of conclude with this. Although we do advocacy, it's not kind of our main line of work. We're actually a relief and development organization. And so we have to tie this back into our actual programmatic work in the countries of where we're present. So that reminds us in all of our response, in all of the different sectors that we work, whether it's education, whether it's health, whether it's water and sanitation, whether it's food insecurity, whether it's protection. In the programming that we do, we always make sure that our programs, have a special emphasis on widows, on women, on girls, because and leadership and livelihood. Because if we want to make this transformative change, it's not just going to happen at the advocacy level, it's going to happen at the community level. We need to give these women their rights. We need to have inclusive programming, inclusive opportunities for them so that we can tie back the advocacy with the case studies and the evidence to show that the work we're doing is transformative and will bring about results. And we want to have more women in Congress. We want to have more, not necessarily queens, but more prime ministers. We want to see women out there and having our societies be inclusive for all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christina. I loved what you said about give voice to the women and not speak for them. And it connected to what Liliana was talking about earlier in terms of including women in the decision-making process. So it's so important to just have sincere platforms and ways to engage women and to hear from them and not just speak for them or to have it as a performative basis. And I'm looking forward to that launch. Woohoo! We'll all be part of it, 30 countries, and contribute. So with that, I would like to move to the next speaker, Audrey Kitagawa. President, International Academy of Multicultural Cooperation and co-chairperson for Gender Equality and Human Trafficking working group for the G20 Interfaith Forum. Audrey.
Thank you so much and good afternoon, everyone. I am so pleased to be a panelist in this session on ensuring full engagement of women and girls in religion and society. And I will address this topic by starting with religion and how beliefs and practices of religion have seeped into society and become part of the cultural practices, behaviors, and normative values of society. In her book, Persisting Patriarchy, Kochurani Abraham indicated that religion was one of the greatest identity markers of human beings, along with other social factors such as identity, caste, class, and ethnicity. She examined its role in the construction of gender identity through the experiences of the Catholic Syrian Christian women using a feminist lens. And although I will mention some religions, we should also, and I won't have time to indicate many other religions, so it is not a calling out of any particular religion, but I think it is very indicative of how religious practices actually seep into society. So Kochurani indicated that religious doctrines, beliefs, and practices serve to translate to everyday experiences the patriarchal ideologies that legitimize and reinforce the existing gender hierarchy. And gendered consciousness acquires a normative value in the lives of women and men through religious indoctrination, which affirms man's position as the head of the family and consequently idealizes and glorifies submission as a characteristic mark of womanliness. And this has a hegemonic impact, according to Kochurani, on women as it normalizes their subordination as divinely ordained. And consequently, patriarchy persists despite women's higher ranking in gender development indices, mainly because it is mediated by religion. And in biblical patriarchy, there are a set of beliefs concerning gender relations and their manifestations in institutions, including marriage, the family, and the home. And it sees the father as the head of the home, responsible for the conduct of the family. And the tenets of biblical patriarchy are, for example, God reveals himself as masculine, not feminine. God ordained distinct gender roles for man and woman as part of the created order. A husband and father is the head of his household, a family leader, provider, and protector. And male leadership in the home carries over into the church. Only men are permitted to hold ruling positions in the church, and a God-honoring society will likewise prefer male leadership in civic and other spheres. And since the woman was created as a helper to her husband, as the bearer of children, and as a keeper of the home, the God-ordained and proper sphere of dominion for the wife is in the household, and that which is connected with the home. Both sons and daughters are under the command of their fathers as long as they are under his roof or otherwise the recipients of his provision and protection. Now, biblical patriarchy is similar to complementarianism, and many of their differences are only one of degree and emphasis. And while complementarianism holds to exclusively male leadership in the church and in the home, biblical patriarchy extends that exclusion to civic spaces as well, so that women should not be civic leaders, should not have careers outside of the home. And in practice, this meant that women should not vote, work outside of the home, and are under the authority and subordination of the male. Now, one can say that religion has promoted patriarchy through religious scriptures and teachings, through religious ceremonies and practices, and through the structure and power relations of religious organizations. And religious practices also stigmatize some biological functions intertwined with the very essence of being a woman, like, for example, menstruation. And menstruating women can be prevented from participating in religious activities or stepping foot onto sacred sites because they are perceived as impure. Most religions also do not allow women to have leadership positions within their structures. And Jill Filipovic, in a recent article, wrote, "Historically, marriage has meant the passing of a woman or girl from her father's authority to her husband's. And not so long ago, married women in the US could be denied a credit card if they didn't have their husband's permission to get one. Heaven forbid, and marriage gave a husband the legal right to rape his wife. Marital rape wasn't criminalized in all 50 states until the 1990s, and loopholes still exist today." Feminists have spent several centuries trying to change the many laws that rendered women non-legal persons by virtue of marriage, and we have not yet fully succeeded. Across much of the world, wives still don't have the same rights as their husbands when it comes to everything from divorce to property rights to child custody to inheritance and the ability to choose to get married in the first place. And in many countries, women cannot marry who they wish. In many conservative religious traditions, marriage remains explicitly patriarchal, with wives instructed to submit to their husbands and the husband considered the top authority in the family. Now, in their book, Religion and the Changing Role of Women, by Barbara Hargrove, Jean Miller-Schmidt, and Sheila Grieve-Devaney, they wrote, quote, "As the role of women in the society at large has changed, religion in America has responded to the changes in a number of ways. New professional roles in church and synagogues have been open to women, including, in most mainline denominations, that of ordained clergy. Lay leadership positions as well are increasingly being filled by women. And along with these structural changes, a number of theological issues have been engendered, including the recovery of women's share of religious history, changing images of God and the church, and issues relating to sexual equality and justice. On the other hand, some religious groups have taken the lead in opposing women's assumption of more public roles, and also movements to free women from domestic role through, among other things, abortion, birth control, and divorce. Now, these issues have joined to larger movements over which religious groups and denominations have become extremely polarized. They have also affected the church's expectations of a large pool of female volunteer workers. And thus, the general pattern of changing roles for women has changed the structure, both social and ideological, of American religion. Now, ultimately, how do we ensure the full participation of women and girls in religion and society? It implies an equal participation of women and girls with that of men. Well, while we recognize that the political, cultural, and social divides have deepened, especially in the highly polarized United States, when we see the U.S. Supreme Court poised to overturn Roe versus Wade, and race relations taking centrality in debates over school curriculum, and the tremendous contrasts between the financially privileged and the growing poor, and the erosion of the moderating balance of the middle class, how do we ensure the participation of women and girls in religion and society? We must look to the greater support, I would posit, and enforcement of the international legal instruments which exist today that didn't exist 77 years ago. We now have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Charter of the United Nations, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, Commission on the Status of Women, and multiple Security Council resolutions that seek the greater protection and engagement of women and girls. We have UN Women and the vibrant involvement of many communities of faith with UN initiatives that support the equal participation of women across all disciplines of society. And the Sustainable Development Goal number 5 exclusively deals with women and addresses gender equality and empowering all women and girls. And we need to keep developing these international frameworks and to expand the engagement of women and girls through the powerful support of international communities. And may these legal frameworks be honored by the states and implemented in practice through the communities of faith all over the world to encourage the full participation of women and girls in religious communities and society. And we must recognize that women are the powerful agents of transformation. And if we expect to have a more peaceful and, just world order, we cannot exclude 50% of the world's population. We must bring women on board in all positions of leadership and representational bodies to enhance the peace and security agenda and resist moving the hands of time backwards to the detriment of women. We must protect their human rights as robustly as we seek the greater protection of the human rights for people everywhere. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Audrey. I loved that recognition that women are powerful agents of transformation. Indeed. Yay for that. Also, thank you for bringing to light the dangers of patriarchy and how the religious beliefs have seeped into society. And with that, I'd like to move to our last speaker, Dr. Lo, as I like to call her, Dr. Louis Sprague. I've never said that out loud, Sprague. Sprague. There you go. It's always just Dr. Lo for me. President of the Guibord Center of Religions, for Religions Inside Out. Thank you.
Thank you, Tasneem. It is a great honor to be here and to be on this panel. And certainly one of the things that becomes apparent immediately is that if we're going to ensure the full inclusion of women and girls in religion and society, it's going to take all of us. And it's going to take us all doing different strategies together. The Guibord Center is an interfaith, educational, and experiential organization. And we bring people together to challenge assumptions in order to unleash the sacred and excuse me, to unleash the sacred and bring forth the spirituality that transforms the world. If you look at what's going on today in the world, we see these struggles going on between men and women, and struggles going on with different ways that we're going to handle crisis in the world. And I want to look at two assumptions that we have and how we can see those differently and how important that is in this struggle. And then I want to share two stories and talk about a couple of things that the Guibord Center is doing. Many years ago, physicians and researchers looked at what happens to human beings when they come under threat. And they created something, or they identified something called fight or flight syndrome. I'm assuming that most of you are aware of that, yes? And that means that if I'm under threat, my adrenaline surges and I am ready to go to war or to get out. There's one small problem with that study. They ignored women. When women are stressed, their bodies react initially the same way and then differently. They start producing the hormone oxytocin, and women look to doing something called tending and befriending. When women are in crisis, they affiliate. It sounds to me like we need some of that today as we're dealing with crises in the world. And the power of women, and I think part of the path forward for women, is finding different ways to affiliate. The second concept I want to bring forward is there's an old theory about how people think, and it says that concept messes up percept. There are a lot of different ways of saying this, but what that means is if I have a concept of what something is, like what a woman is, then I stop seeing all of the other things that could help me see her differently. And it's really important, I think, for us to also look at the way we think about women and the role of women today and where our power is. Because our power comes again in the different ways that we can affiliate and that we can tend for others. Part of the conflict that we're in the world is people who are in power don't want to give it up, because their image is that if I give up my power, you're going to treat me the way I've treated you. And I'll do anything to defend against that. But that's not actually true when you look at what women are trying to do. Two stories. These are, the Guibord Center was started by the late Reverend Dr. Gwen Guibord. And Gwen was a remarkable human being who truly loved others and was concerned about the well-being and the sanctity of every person that she had contact with. And she did a lot of work with the National Council of Churches. And there was a rumor that got started around the National Council of Churches, actually a warning that was to men that said, you're really going to want to go have dinner with Gwen, but be careful because 3 days later, you're going to realize what you agreed to. And when she was early in her career, And these stories, by the way, did not come from her. They came from other people. And then I went back and checked them with her. There was an individual who did not believe in the ordination of women, did not believe in empowering women. And Gwen was in the process of trying to get onto a council, and he did everything in his power to stop her. Everything he could think of. And he was the head of the council. And Gwen kept meeting with him, kept making contact with him, and said, I'd really like to be part of the council. And he said, no, can't possibly happen. And she said, fine. Tell me how it is that you came to the priesthood, and tell me about your family, and tell me about the things that are important to you. And she began to really care about him. And there came a time when she was brought before the council, and there was huge uproar on the council about, yes or no, and do we want women, do we not want women, what do we do? And so she was allowed to speak before the vote was taken. And she said to the council, she said, I want to say something very important at this point, because there's a divisiveness that's happened around this. And I want to say that when I watched this individual this morning at the prayer service, I saw that he loved our Lord as deeply as I do. That he is as faithful and as good a human being as I am. And I do not want this vote to damage our community. And I ask for each of you to go into your heart and vote according to what is right. And I want you to know that no matter how the vote turns out, I will continue to love and support this council. And with that, she was excused and walked out. And when the council voted, everyone was amazed that they voted unanimously to invite her in. And on his deathbed, this priest asked for Gwen to be there, to be with him. Because we are about relationships. We're about building and holding relationships. Another story went a different way. Much of the work that the Guibord Center does is behind the scenes. It's trying to help people get through their difficulties so they can connect again. And this took place in the Middle East. And there was a very difficult situation at a hotel, and everyone gathered at a hotel, and they were trying to find a path through this with very conflicted people and their situations. And at some point, one of the warlords threw his hands down on the table and said, I can't do this. And he went to get up, and Gwen, without thinking, reached across the table and pinned his hand down. And at that moment, guns were drawn. No one knew what was going to happen. And she looked him straight in the eye and she said, you can't go because you're too important. Your presence here is too important. Please stay. And he took a breath and sat back. And everybody took a breath and they worked through it. It's about saying there's something more important than on my agenda. There is an image that when we come together, men and women can do something extraordinary. And that's an image that we need to carry forward as we tell our stories and we retell our stories. Excuse me. The Guibord Center has a policy, and in our policy, it's that we let people tell their own stories. So if we want to look at the issue of violence against women in Islam, a lot of people in America were interested in that topic, are interested in that topic. We went to Muslim women and said, tell us your experience of the Holy Quran. And what do you want us to know? And they said, if you're going to do this, you need to talk about women, violence, and mercy and peace in the Holy Quran. And so we brought 3 Muslim women, scholars, mothers, to share with us their experience and their value. And it was a much better workshop than anybody else could have done. We brought in 3 feminist scholars early on, a Christian feminist, a Muslim feminist, and a Jewish feminist, to talk about our creation stories from their point of view. How can we look at this in a world that is affiliated, that God created, not a world that was polarized? We brought in Amy Jill Levine, who many of you may or may not know is a 1st century Jewish scholar. She was raised by Orthodox Jews. She is Jewish, and she probably understands where Jesus was coming from as a 1st century Jew more than many of the rest of us. And we ask her to talk about the Bible and women and violence, to help us understand that, to open that up. What would that have meant in the context that it was created in? So how do we begin to take on some of these things with a different twist to them? How do we begin to open this up and be more creative? The Guibord Center, as an interfaith organization, we have about 35 different advisors that cover the full spectrum from paganism to Catholicism. We have Baha'i, everybody is welcome at our table to offer their spiritual perspective, because we're enriched by everyone. God could have made us all the same and chose not to. And we believe that the reason for that is a very exciting reason, that we each have something that we can contribute to this. So that's another one of the things that we did. But we wanted to talk about the issue of faith, women, and violence. And so we gathered many of our women leaders, and we sat down for a number of meetings saying what's important and how do we do healing here. And one of the things that the women said is, we want to explain from our different faiths our understanding of how violence comes in and is misunderstood as part of our culture and becomes part of our religion. How do we help shift that and tell those stories? And so they did. We had invited women who were traumatized, who needed to be healed, to come to this, and we wanted to have a presentation of men, but not physically there as the participants, because women had had to listen to men for too long. So what we did is we went across faiths and we asked for fathers to come and to bring their sons and to share with us, to make a short 2-minute film about fathers telling their sons about what they wanted them, how they wanted them to treat women, and the father's understanding of women according to their faith tradition. And they all came together saying that violence against women is violence against Islam, is violence against Christianity, is violence against Hinduism. But in the midst of this program, we offered that, including Indigenous, by the way. We offered that. So film is a way to do that, sharing with a step back. One of the things we did at that was we did a very powerful liturgy, and we had white pashmina scarves. This is one of them. And the scarf says on it, "I'm a beloved child of the holy always." Because one of the things that we knew was, if you've been violated, you feel dirty. And we wanted something beautiful. And we asked all of those women from all of those different faiths to bless the scarves. And then we asked the women who were present, and they brought their boyfriends I was amazed at how many men filled the cathedral. They brought their boyfriends, they brought their fathers, they brought their brothers. And we invited everyone, including perpetrators, to look at what it was that separates you from what God created you to be. And we asked them to write that out. And we created a huge fire on the stage and invited them then to come up and to put that into the fire, to release it, and to be wrapped in a scarf. The thing that surprised me at the end of that particular service was how many men came forward and said, "Can I have one for my mom? Can I have a scarf for my sister? Can I have a scarf for my girlfriend?" Because men want to heal. They want to help, and they don't know how to help. So at the Guibord Center, our goal is to say, how do we help create a world where we can see men and women working together in ways that are enriching and empowering? How do we do that? How do we continue to keep that growing? And so I won't take up more of your time right now. That's a sample of some of the things that we do. And it's going to take all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lowe,
You're welcome.
for modeling what it really takes to build relationships, what it really takes to ensure full engagement from everybody, men, women, young, old. It has to be sincere. There has to be healing. There has to be space to listen and to disagree and have that healthy discourse and still say, your presence is needed here. Sit, don't leave. Thank you. Thank you. It also reminded me, just hearing all our speakers, of a recent article I came across in the Harvard Business Review. And it was saying basically how becoming a leader involves much more than being given a leadership title or doing the work of a leader. And what is involved is a fundamental identity shift. And I heard a lot of our speakers speak to that today, of how women need to be looked differently, and women sometimes need to see themselves differently. So it's an inner and an outer work. I'm going to take a moment to just kind of review some. I may have missed some, but as I was taking notes and listening to our speaker review some of the action items you have invited us to take. It starts with education. Educate the men, educate our societies within and outside, make women part of the decision-making process, to look in scripture and go back to our roots and see what inclusion looks like, what advocacy, community, education, all of those look like in our traditions, to develop international frameworks and to actually share them with one another and use them with one another through practice. A very important reminder, it'll take all of us, every one of us, to do this work, to find different ways to affiliate and genuine ways to build relationships and heal. And then, of course, the power of stories, as shared from actually all of our speakers did that. So stories is such a powerful medium to really ensure full engagement, which is what we're here to talk about for women and girls. So we do have a little bit of time for questions. I wanted to, let me get a sense of if you have questions in the audience, if folks have. Otherwise, I did want to go back to that idea of that fundamental identity shift. And what do you think it will take for women to see ourselves as leaders and empower ourselves? And what will it take for men and others, elders, right? Those leaders who might have been around for a while and say they want us on the table, but don't always make that genuine space for us at the table as equals. So what will it take to have that fundamental identity shift? If any of our speakers have a response to that, and then I see a hand, we'll come to you next. Go for it, Audrey.
Thank you so much for that question. You framed the question with respect to identity shift in women, but I also think it's very important for men to have an identity shift because, you see, this is built on a power dynamic and the disparity in power dynamic, and it is a domination and dominion over as opposed to having an equal co-participatory relationship. So this whole aspect of dominion and domination is very full of testosterone. And so we definitely need to be able to create an identity shift, which is very difficult for the men because historically, this identity of a patriarchy is very much a part of your history, all of our history, society's history, cultural history, and has become part of the DNA of families. So it is going to take a willingness to move out of the power dynamics and to be willing to open the space to equal participation and equal respect. We've heard many powerful words today from dignity, respect, human rights, etc. But it also takes the ceaseless, fearless self-examination of each individual to really see our own biases, prejudices, and how much we have invested in this powerful dynamics of dominion over. And I think this is going to take a huge lift. And also, I think women do step up to leadership roles because we are leaders of our families and we multitask. There are so many things that we are capable of doing, and this is leadership every day that we live in a multitude of ways. And so I think that is already embellished and imbued within us, and we have to give ourselves the space and the opportunity to allow that to flourish, regardless of the context within which we may find ourselves, and ultimately that we don't allow ourselves to be oppressed, repressed, depressed, and marginalized.
I'll jump in on this one, and it's actually going to weave together the theme I started with, and that much of this conference has been about, or the summit around refugees. I would highly recommend, speaking of our women in Congress, and I've had a chance to get to know both Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar quite well, even before they ascended to these positions. But Ilhan Omar has a autobiography that came out not too long ago. I think it's called This Is What America Looks Like, and talks about her trajectory or her path from being actually a refugee herself, having fled and being resettled as a refugee, and that experience, and all of the things that her path led her to where she is now, and able to be on the other side and understanding the vulnerabilities of refugees and other disenfranchised communities and how to serve them, and really comes to that from that place in her heart. And some of the obstacles that she illustrated, and I think are common threads that you'll hear, was, it was her family support. So I think, that's essential. And it was eventually the community support. She talks a lot about how initially the community, her ethnic community, her faith community were not supportive as she got into these very public roles, as she was a state legislator first before she even ran for Congress, and how they were actually an obstacle until she was able to show them that by ascending to leadership and having the ability to influence legislation and change policies, she became an asset for the community. So it's family, it's community, it's showing this asset and not deficit. And I think it's this role modeling too, because both of them, if you talk to them, will say, something that they're most proud of now is that they are role models. Little girls can say, maybe we haven't had a woman president yet in the United States, but we do have women who are on that path. So so those are some of the things I would say.
Yo percibo la necesidad de 4 cosas.
I perceive the need for 4 points. First, to de-learn. We have to de-learn habits, cultural schemes, relationship modes that are tainted by machism. And not only men have them, we women also sometimes have those, and we produce those relational dynamics that we have to de-learn. But we also have to learn. We would all have the responsibility of educating to recognize a common dignity. Since we're children, we have to teach young children and we ourselves to educate ourselves in order to recognize this common dignity that we all have. In the third place, we have to grow with our values in terms of our identity, each one of us as men or women, and also have been aware of where we are, in what group we belong, and there to generate participation possibilities and to strengthen the networks. And the fourth point, I think it's very important that we embrace reciprocity, to be aware that this path, we need to take them together, that men are not a threat for women and women are not a threat for men, that we have to walk together as sisters and brothers, and this will make us purify our relationships, to learn to look at each other in a new way, to value each other in our differences, and to understand that the world is built up from the feminine and the masculine lenses, and those both lenses are obvious, both for men and women, both are necessary.
Two things. One is that I take great hope in the interfaith community, because in interfaith work, we have leaders who are willing to listen to one another, who are willing to say, it's not my way or the highway. And I find that in interfaith work, we can get to a place of spirituality where we share common values. And I think we can make progress there. Another thing that I've learned from another wonderful interfaith organization called New Ground is there's a huge value in us connecting with the second tier of leadership. Because often people who are in the pinnacle of a leadership position have to hold that position. And if we can step down one level and get to some of the young people and some of the up and coming people, we can build coalitions and move from there. And I think that's a really important tool for us as we go forward.
Community to the UN. And I want to thank the wonderful speakers, 5 strong women leaders who spoke so eloquently about this issue. I was looking at the title of the session, and it's Ensuring Full Engagement of Women and Girls in Religion and Society. And it saddens me that there are 5 women on the panel and no man. I have come to request, if I'm ever invited to speak, and there's only women on the panel, if it's about the advancement of women, and I ask, why not a man? Because gender equality is not about women alone, it's also about men. That said, I believe there's a lot to be gained by men, and somehow I have also learned that change only happens when one sees a benefit to the change. And I'm going to share a quote from the Baha'i writings. As long as women are prevented from attaining their highest possibility, so long will men be unable to achieve the greatness which might be theirs. So if we are to advance in this world, we have to advance when both women and men are advancing equally together. And I had a question which was asked by Tasneem. I was going to exactly what you asked. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Was it Bani? Thank you, Bani, for that question and that observation. And I see Tahil. If there are any other questions, I think what I would like to do is just capture questions, and then we have like maybe less than 10 minutes, and then the speakers can decide which question to take.
So first, actually, kind of an offshoot of what Baniji just said. I don't think this should be the only panel where all women are speaking on women and girls. Every other panel deserves to have complete female leadership in conversations about every other topic. So first, that should be voiced. My actual question is regarding something that I thought of when Sister Christina, you were talking about the initiative that Islamic Relief is starting. And it's thinking about the qualities and examples of good feminist leadership from men. What does that look like from each of your experiences?
So what do good examples of feminists from men look like? Men models. A question.
Hi, thank you.
Noor.
I don't know how to phrase this, but I'll try. So I guess the way I understand is that, yes, we are all equal, but we're different. And partly because we are created differently. So how does one balance the fact that we are equal, but we're also different physiologically, and so therefore with that comes different roles and responsibilities? And what do we mean by true equality? Or is it more of equity? So I think there's a misunderstanding there in terms of what does that mean, what does that look like? I think that's where maybe a better understanding of equality, equity, and the different roles and responsibilities that we have as individuals, as a family, as a society, and as a nation. Thank you.
So how do we work through those tensions and those differences and the distinction between equality and equity? I knew that word. Okay. Any other questions before we go back?
Solo una opinión. A veces,
It's just an opinion, but sometimes I have the impression when I hear some speeches in society that the idea of class fight is translated to different interpretations that have to do with theology. I believe that perhaps we should point or aim at the idea of recuperation for common objectives that we have. Do you believe that from the religious realm, can we find that kind of a space for cooperation, men, women, in the equality of opportunities? Not always the equality in the roles that they have, but at least the equality of opportunity. And I would like to tell you an experience. For example, the clergy is mostly men, at least a Protestant one, and I find that there are more men that take care of establishing churches than women. Hence, I don't see this as a result of an inequality, but an option that people take one or another role. But I'm talking about specifically about the my religious community. The national anthem in my country says the following: break the chains, said people, and the poor Sochosa liberty asks. So we find on one place the rich people and the poor people asking for the same. In this case, freedom, the national anthem. And to find in that expression of freedom the meeting up and the cooperation of class more than fighting of classes. And finally, perhaps we see that opportunity for cooperation. How can we strengthen that cooperation, in this case between men and women, to be able to find the equality of opportunities?
Thank you. So just really quickly, I'm going to summarize summarize the 3 questions we have, and then I'll ask our speakers to take either one of them. There was one question, if I understood it correctly, this idea of looking into our religion for examples of cooperation. Equality of opportunities is what I heard references to. The second one was looking at models for male allies, advocates, feminists. And then the third one was dealing with the tensions between the role divisions and just the differences that are there, and how do we work in the equity and equality with that. Not tension, just a difference. Totally. Yeah, the tension isn't necessarily negative, it's just their differences.
Lo que es igual es la dignidad.
What is the same is dignity. We have the same dignity, but we are wonderfully different in sensibilities, in criteria, in ideas, in visions of the world visions, in ways we capture reality and we express it as well, the way we express it. And this, far from being a threat, is a possibility. Precisely the difference that allows men and women to have different hermeneutics and the ways we approach reality. And that's a very rich aspect. So we invite to complement each other, where from where we are, we contribute to beautify the world, we contribute to different realities, we give a fullness to the experience of divinity that inhabits in us, but there's a certainty. Dignity is exactly the same. And that's something that it seems the world has forgotten or somebody doesn't want to show. It's something that is not happening for everyone in every context. And that's why we have to work decisively, because dignity is the same.
I'll take both of them actually, because one is easier. About good leadership from men, or back to this pledge in our campaign. I mentioned it had started out as an external facing and became very internal within our community, and even more so even within our own organization as a family and as a federation. Looking at female leadership, we don't have any women CEOs across all of our offices at the moment. So one of the things that we are asking all of our CEOs to do is take a pledge to create more pipelines. And so we're hoping to see change even within our own organization that can then hopefully be model and inspiration for other organizations, because we're putting them on the record and holding them accountable. To answer the question for both of my brothers here about equality and cooperation, I'm actually just going to read something from here that I think will answer that from the actual declaration. So this is in our section that's called "The Prophetic Message is One of Balance and Justice for All." And it says, challenging patriarchal structures that discriminate against women and girls is part of the prophetic example. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, did this by declaring the equal status and rights of women before God and in relation to men, encouraging the pursuit of knowledge for all human beings, irrespective of gender, respecting and valuing the participation of women in society and work, and emphasizing the equal status and reciprocal rights of wives and husbands. And then each time we had a passage like that, we had to back it up, as I mentioned. And so in this case, it was not from the Quran, it was actually from the last sermon of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, before he passed away. He had said, "O people," or "O men, it is true that you have certain rights with regard to your women, but they also have rights over you." And I'll end there.
Thank you so much for these important questions, and I just wish we had more time to address them in more detail. But really, basically, I think what we're talking about would be the issues of social justice. And basically, there are 4 pillars of social justice, and that would be equity, access, participation, and rights. So if we were just to frame each one, and equity really being this whole idea of fairness and justice. So if we were to look at each word and see the actual implementation of the word and the concept in society, then we get to see where the balance or imbalance really exists and what should be done to do the reparative justice to bring about the changes that are needed. But I also wanted to bring up this aspect of unitive justice. And we have heard these words that were also articulated in some of the panels. And unitive justice basically is the concept of having justice be applied with loving kindness. So I think that is very, very important, because this whole aspect of cooperation is built into this aspect of loving kindness and respect for each other. You know, I had a wonderful friend by the name of Dr. Hans-Peter Duhr, and he was a quantum nuclear physicist, and he wrote the very important Potsdam Manifesto. He was also the former president of the Max Planck Institute. And you know, he indicated that this word cooperation was exceedingly important. And we have to recognize that we cannot do anything alone. Not the women alone, and not the men alone. And the fact of the matter is, yes, we do need each other. I mean, just like in electricity, you have the, you know, the positive, the negative, the AC, the DC. I mean, so in creation, you have this binary, so to speak, and this is the duality of the world that we are always living in and always negotiating through. So ultimately, though, to have this ultimate cooperation, we are talking about transcendence. And it is within the capacity of each human being to be able to attain that transcendental state. And part of the spiritual journey is to be able to discipline ourselves to be able to attain that reality. But I do personally believe that that reality already exists, and it is incumbent upon each and every one of us to undertake the steps to be able to realize the reality of it in our own lives. And so, you know, I think because we are in the context of a conference and we are here to inspire each other and to give each other hope, that this is also endemic to the nature of the human spirit, that hope springs eternal in the human breast, that I do believe that it is important for us to articulate the words, and I do acknowledge the men and the women who have come together in this particular setting as an expression of our willingness to cooperate together. So I thank all of you for being here today.
I'm noticing that late in the day, our audience is mainly men. And I want to thank the men who are here, because I think that to answer the question about feminist men, I think what I would call a feminist man is a man who understands that this journey is one that will enrich all of us, and that we begin to recognize the sanctity in each of us and get in touch with original grace. And we get so hung up on original sin, but let's pay attention a little bit to original grace and use that as a source of strength to do justice for these children that were brought to us earlier, and to do justice for the elderly and all of those who are struggling. I think earlier this week, I had printed out Fetzer organization has done a wonderful study on spirituality in America. And I had printed it out on my desk. And then Southern Poverty Law Center sent their report on hate groups in America. And I printed that out. And I was suddenly sitting there with these two reports. And this is where we are. This is where we are right now. And we're in the middle, and we have a choice to make. And the choice is really about how do we bring the spirituality and the love and the wholeness back to the disenfranchised, back to the wounded, back to the hateful and hurting. And how do we do it in order to elevate the compassion that we need for those in this world who are on the wrong side of privilege, those for whom we need to bring our efforts and our compassion together, because a just world will be a better world for all of us. And it will be a world that will continue to survive. If we continue in the path that we're on, where greed and fear run us, we are running out of time. There is huge hope, and the hope comes from the fact that there are so many of all of us that are working together to say, we need a world that values men and women, the young and the old, the animals and the creation. And that's something that we're doing together. So thank you, each of you.
Thank you. So I'm going to do one more attempt to capture some of the wisdoms that these ladies have shared with us, and very, very briefly, the importance of critical self-examination, super important, acknowledging and addressing the power dynamics. It's important to name them and to work on them, to look for effective role models and to create role models. So we have those as examples, to unlearn habits that are not serving us anymore, to educate the children of our common dignity. So as they grow, they embody some of the values we're talking about, to engage with the second tier of leadership. I love that reminder. Woohoo. To pledge to create more pipelines for women, to adopt the 4 pillars of social justice, to practice loving kindness. And I think Dr. Lowe's story specifically touched me on what that looks like, to practice grace. And the one that I would like to end with is to really genuinely, openly lean into the differences that we have. I'm reminded of a verse in the Quran that says, we created you from a single male and female into different nations and tribes so that ye may get to know one another. And it is my belief, my firm belief, that the differences that are there, that tension that is there, is not a source of negativity, but can actually be a source of enrichment and a lot of nourishment. So I invite all of us to genuinely, with grace, with critical examination, with compassion and loving kindness, to engage with those differences and get to know one another.